Welcome to What's in a Game. On today's show, we'll get into the Jonas Valančiūnas news and break all of that down for you all, so stay tuned. I'm Grace Jean here with my co-host, Will Jones. How are you doing today, Will, on this 4th of July Eve?
I was really happy with the Nuggets direction. Now I'm slightly annoyed with this Val news. We couldn't even do a pod just fully celebrating and happy about all these things like other
Well, we
Nuggets.
took too long. You and I had too busy of schedules to have done this a day early or even like a couple hours earlier.
But I'm glad to be able to get on after that's dropped just to talk through it with you and the fans.
Let's jump into the Valančiūnas news first. Valančiūnas Dilemma. I love all your proper punctuation and everything there. Well, using all the proper characters.
Judas Valančiūnas is going around in the chat.
Oh my gosh. That's terrible. Oh gosh. Okay. We're going to talk about the initial Valančiūnas reports and then kind of talk about the sort of branching option trees that come from that. Most of the time, if you've been watching the show for a while, you know I like to do really detailed show notes and have as many answers as I possibly can planned for you guys throughout, and kind of anticipate questions as well, so that we can, dive into any subject as thoroughly as possible. Obviously, this Valančiūnas news breaks right before we record. Um, so we're going to be relying heavily on the chat to field the questions about this situation that we haven't thought of in the a short time span. Okay, well, so if you could please bring up the initial report about Valančiūnas here. So this is a report from Donatas Urbonas, who reports for Basket News. Donatas says Valančiūnas is considering a stunning EuroLeague move and exiting the NBA. Per Basket News sources, Valančiūnas was lured by Panathinaikos, which is a Greek club, with a multi-year offer from them. Yeah, that was pretty stunning news. And there were a lot of questions that came to mind for me about what this meant. The first one was, does this impact the actual trade that Valančiūnas is in? Because the trade with Sacramento was not final. We didn't actually get to talk about this on our last show, but obviously the reason that this is relevant, if you haven't been following free agency at all, but just when you only watch our show, on day 2 of free agency, the Nuggets traded Dario Saric for Jonas Valančiūnas straight up from the Sacramento Kings. That was done because the Kings were trying to shed salary. Dario makes less than Jonas. Sacramento needed to, I believe, get under the first apron because they were trying to complete a sign and trade for Dennis Schroeder. So the reason I was concerned about this, like my initial concern was, does this impact the trade? Like, is Dario back? Like, we can't even move if we don't know that, right? Since this initial report, there has been further reporting by Jake Fisher, one of these rather prominent NBA insiders, basically said that from everything he's been told, Sacramento is not planning on reneging on this deal. You might ask why they would do that. Well, if Jonas was getting bought out potentially and willing to give some money back, it might be advantageous for them, but they do not. It doesn't seem like they want to, because they have a lot of different balls up in the air. One, they're trying to get this Dennis Schroeder sign and trade completed, and they need to be under the first apron to do that. They can't have Valančiūnas' money on the books. They probably don't want to have this situation lingering. The other thing that Sacramento has been linked to is a potential, probably a sign and trade or something, with the Warriors to try to sign Jonathan Kuminga in restricted free agency. I'm not saying that would happen, but that's something that they are apparently involved in trying to do. Sacramento is also in the process of potentially trying to sign Russell Westbrook. I think they've still been mentioned in those talks. If Malik Monk is involved in one of these other signings, so there's just a lot of things that Sacramento is trying to do, regardless of what you think of those things. And Sacramento is definitely in a race with the Pelicans for having a worst of all time offseason. Woat offseason. So grade those moves however you want, but they want to do them and they don't want to be locked in. So my initial concern was at least quelled. Apparently, it won't affect his move to Denver. No, that's right. Like the trade is still going through with Sacramento, so that is like Sacramento is not going to renege on this, according to all reports. Like obviously, that could change. It's the other thing we didn't mention is that this trade is not final. No trades can be final until July 6th. So we got 3 days until this is made final, but there's all reporting is that that part is not going to change. What's your sort of next concern about the situation with Jonas?
I mean, my biggest concern is just whether he's going to play for us. But I feel like we are in a very good position to still ensure that that happens. There is the question that you shouldn't necessarily bend over backwards to offer him guarantees or some kind of weird extension if this is a leverage play, which people in the chat have brought up and are wondering. And I definitely kind of agree with. But if all it takes is us just guaranteeing his second year, like I'm kind of down to do that if that's 2 years of him playing for us. But if he doesn't really want to be here, that's the biggest concern that I would have.
Well, the question, like, if it is a leverage play, he doesn't necessarily not want to be here, if that is the case,
Yes, that
right?
is good. Yeah. Yeah, I just want him to play. I was so excited about him for the Nuggets. And yeah, it would really suck if he just all of a sudden retired. I think people are wondering about that if you want to talk about the logistics of it, because he can't
Yeah,
just leave. He can't
right.
just like
Okay.
retire.
So, what is I don't want to talk about this in terms of worst case scenario, but what are the two sort of options? Either he stays or he goes, and then what are the different ways that that could look? Let's talk about what it would look like if Jonas wanted to leave. Uh, Jonas is not allowed to just retire from the NBA and go sign with another club overseas. There's this concept called I believe it's called a
Clearance
clearance
letter.
letter. That's right.
Yeah.
A clearance letter where if you sign with any professional basketball team, you basically have to, sign a statement that says you fulfilled all like outstanding contracts with other clubs, right? If they didn't get that, then that basketball club, in this case, it was Panathinaikos, I believe, is a Greek club that's interested reportedly in Jonas. Wouldn't be able to, um, he wouldn't be able to play in any like sanctioned competitions with them. So it feels like it's sort of an international treaty type thing where this is just like a thing. So he couldn't just retire. That's not an option. If Jonas wanted to leave badly, wanted to leave Denver to go overseas, he would need to be bought out. And uh, Keith Smith from Spot Track actually shared a story that he did on a similar situation last year. Is it last year? Yeah. Like 23-24 season with Sasha Vezenkov, who had come from overseas to play with the Kings. And then in his second year of his contract, wanted to go back to Europe, uh, but obviously was still under contract, and the Kings didn't want to buy him out. Eventually, they traded him to the Raptors, and he arranged a buyout with the Raptors, but the Raptors were not willing to take on any dead cap hit. So in going through with the buyout, Vazenkov basically forfeited the entirety of the rest of his contract with the Raptors, and they were like, "Okay, we'll buy you out, but we're not like we don't want any cap hits, so you have to take like the entire last year of your contract off." Um, because he had 3 years, he spent one in Sacramento. He wanted to leave in the second one. They didn't. They traded him at the trade deadline. And then at the end of that season, Sasha decided, "Okay, I'll forfeit the entire third year of my contract." Okay, so that's what he had to do. I'm not saying that if Jonas really wants to leave that badly, and, like, to be clear, the reason that Sasha would have done that is that he had money coming to him if he went back to, Olympiacos, which is another Greek club. Greece just really likes to, jump in and, these are prominent in clubs in the EuroLeague, so not, I don't actually have an agenda there. It's just kind of funny. Um so, okay, he would not be able to just leave. Denver would have to agree to a buyout, and probably the scenario that they would agree to one, if it is like that dire that like he absolutely doesn't want to be here and like 100% wants to go back to Europe, uh, the situation that they would agree to a buyout in that case is if he forfeited almost the entirety of his contract with Denver, or the $10 billion that he's owed this season, right? Okay. Any questions about that and like what it looks like if Jonas were to leave in those circumstances?
I read that article about Pazenkov and that whole situation. Yeah, like I was saying, I feel comfortable with the position that Denver is in because the trade's gonna go through. We're off Dario.
Yes.
It's just a matter of what does Val want
So
to
we don't have to
do.
deal with the messiness of like the Dario trade gets rescinded and now
Yeah.
we lose a roster spot and we have to deal with his money on the books. That's not the case,
Now
right?
it's just a matter of what he wants to do. There's an offer on the table for him in Europe that is interesting for him, obviously, as a player, but you are under contract. Can't just walk away. So you need the buyout. I don't see why Denver would do that unless they are talking and are trying to figure out what this next year of his contract looks like, what his vision is, or like what the new front office's vision is for him, and if he'll find that attractive or not. But I do find it funny that, these new GMs with John and Ben had done all these amazing moves and they make this trade. How often does this happen where you make the trade and then the player throws a little bit of a fuss about it? Because I'm sure they weren't in contact with Val's agent to be like, how interested would he be backing up Jokic? I almost feel bad for them because it's like, this is not a typical situation they're already dealing with. We're not buying him out. So what the hell? It's just like, it's so ridiculous.
Well, okay. I don't think it's super typical. Like this exact situation is not super typical, but players kick up stinks about trades
Yeah.
all the time. We just talked about I forget if we mentioned this on the show, but Drew Holiday gets traded to Portland and immediately there are reports coming out that he's really pissed that Boston traded him to Portland and he doesn't want to be there. And Portland is currently, we've had subsequent reports of Portland is currently in the process of trying to lobby Drew to want to stay there. Like, this is, at the end of the day, this is still a players' league. And it's not to say that Drew, like wouldn't play or whatever. But despite having him under contract for the next few years, Portland like feels the need to like look like we want you here. Like they have to like kind of sweet talk him and try to cajole him basically into like wanting to be there because this is a league where you want to keep your players happy effectively. I'm not saying that that would mean that Denver buys Jonas out for any substantial cap hit because if they did buy him out, whatever they bought him out for would count against their cap. So that's why they would probably want him to forfeit most, if not all, of the money owed to him
Hmm.
on this last year of his deal. He actually has 2 years on his contract this upcoming season and the year after, but the second year is non-guaranteed. So technically, you know, if this year didn't go well, come next summer, Denver could just waive him and then not have to worry about that. It's effectively like a team option on that second year, almost,
Yeah.
right?
But just real quick, because the chat is
Yeah.
wondering about the money specifics, I don't see them buying him out and having dead money. So if he
hmm
did forfeit the contract or the money on his contract and then forfeited the contract, like, can you just do that and just be like, I don't want any of the
No,
money?
so both sides would have to agree to that being the case.
But if that,
So,
let's say they do both agree,
okay.
they can just not give him that money. Then where does that leave the Nuggets in terms of like an open spot? How much
Okay, so
money
you'd
can they
have
give
the open
out?
roster spot. They would have the full mid-level exception available to them, so $14.1 million. And you could use that both in free agency, which is not, great right now because most of the good free agents are taken in the first, at least this week, first few days. Usually it's the first day. But since the new CBA rule also allows you to trade guys into those exceptions, and that was what Denver was gonna do almost if they hadn't. They are still planning on looping this Dario for Val trade in as like a 3-team deal with the Nets, so that
We didn't
you
trigger
know
an apron.
basically so you
Yeah.
don't trigger an apron.
Hmm.
Just trigger warning. That's what we should call the various things that trigger like first and second apron like hard caps, trigger warnings.
Yeah. So, question: the max they can use is 14 mil, or is there separate money they can use to sign? Well, vet mins you can just sign, and the
Veteran minimums you can just sign.
MLE is close to 14 mil.
The MLE, you with the Val money off, I think they would have access to the
The
full
full
14 mil. The other option again is to use the traded player exception generated from the trade
the Nets
to
trade.
trade somebody into it. The thing is Denver doesn't have a lot of assets to send out in a trade, which is why it's kind of sucks that you'd be
Yeah, because that player's just now gone. Travis has this question about like a lawsuit against this other team. Like I said, in EuroLeague, you need to have that
yeah, they're
cleared
not going to
letter.
they're not going to sign him if we don't agree to a
Yeah.
buyout
No
because
Euro team can sign a player if they have other obligations. They have to like prove that they have none. And so that this has to be figured out before he can make some decision on the Euro League. We get the full MLE back for sure. So look, like I don't think the Nuggets are totally screwed if there is some worst case scenario, just because they're not going to let themselves get into a worst case scenario with the dead money. You just saw what the front office was doing. This is not a team to be having dead money when Jokic has already been putting the pressure on them, and they've just made these moves that to me was showing that they were taking Jokic's comments really seriously.
I think that Val, like, just as like my opinion, I think that he's going to end up staying. You see, in the case of Zinkov with Sacramento, he was still he was still playing with Sacramento. He was racking up DNPs sometimes, but it's not like it was an every night thing. Plus, Val is going to be a better player for us than Vezenkov was, if only because he's our only backup center, and Sacramento had lots of different wings that they could play in front of Vezenkov. That if they wanted to just not
Hmm.
deal with that and DNP him, then sure. The other thing, and I was just listening to the DNVR podcast about this, and I'd heard this stuff too, but Val is known as like a really like consummate professional locker room guy kind of thing. So kind of like Drew Holiday, I expect him to play if like that's the situation that they're in. And maybe like if it becomes this untenable thing, maybe they work out something at like the trade deadline. If like again, there are two different motivations that could be at play here from the Jonas side. It could be a leverage play, in which case he's probably going to play anyway and then try to just, contribute as best he can so that he can get that second year guaranteed
Yeah.
anyway on his contract. Or he actually is like tired of the US and is like, the Kings ruined basketball for me. I don't want to go to Denver. I want to leave. And if you get to that point, then you could let him go at the trade deadline and then you could figure out kind of a similar situation that they're in right now where they would have more not technical cap space, but more money available within those exceptions that they are eligible for that they could trade a player into at the deadline, even if they can't sign a free agent. They could also use it to sign like a buyout guy too, and you could like be the best buyout destination at the deadline. Now we'll talk about some of like what the ideal rest of the sort of off season could look like for me. But when you get to uh the trade deadline and like the buyout market, there's usually not a ton of money offered to those guys by their new team because they're like bumping up against aprons and whatnot. If they hadn't been, they would have just like figured out a trade for them so that they wouldn't have to be bought out, right? I'm not advocating for this, but one option is to, like I said, let Val just kind of play and get to the deadline. If it's still like he hates it here and wants to leave, figure out a buyout, and then you have more money available to you on the buyout market, then probably most teams are willing to offer buyout candidates, and there are going to be some good ones, potential buyout candidates this year. So we will see.
You could look to still flip him to some other team, but then that team have to agree to buying him out. So I don't know. I get that there's other teams who might do that, but then do you want a player from that team?
Right. You'd have to do sort of what I've advocated for, like going into the off season before I knew what they were planning, which is try to identify like decent players on teams that are just trying to shed salary and then trade them into your exception. Trade those players into your exception. But there are some free agents that we'll talk about that could take up that space if they wanted to deal with it this off season and just like fill that big man gap in other ways. Um, Like, I mean, honestly, when I first heard about this deal, my reaction I got a lot of shit because I tweeted like overall positive, but mixed reaction, but overall positive deal because obviously, got rid of Dario and got a useful player in exchange, which is great, right? But my first thought was like, oh, I guess this means we're not going after Al Horford anymore, or he's not interested in us, and we're just
Yeah.
like moving on with another big option.
Chat is really saying that Horford to the Warriors is almost done. A lot of that in the chat and a lot of
Oh, interesting. So the reason the Warriors stuff hasn't gone through is that they can't offer him a contract till Kuminga gets moved. I've seen other reports that Al is still deciding between Warriors, Lakers, and retirement. And he's not gonna decide even by this weekend, which is, like, interesting. I think that's just, like, a long time to, 'cause free agency's happening, I get, like, having like, making your personal decisions and all of
mm,
that, especially if you're contemplating retirement, but,
well,
things are moving.
and similarly, like the Nuggets do, like you tweeted this out, Grace, that we need to figure this out quickly because if we are going to pivot to signing other dudes, we need to do it before those people agree to go to other teams.
And we're kind of at that point already in the off
I
season.
know
So I
it's
think
getting
the
close.
best possible outcome is to just convince him to stay for at least most of the season, like through the deadline, and then kind of reevaluate then.
Yeah,
Uh,
Vincent's just saying maybe Al Horford's waiting to see how much money he can get if the once the Kaminga thing's resolved, just because he
hmm,
may be wanting more. What's the max we can give Horford? Just the full MLE, right?
yeah, $14.1 million. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the max. If we couldn't get Val without right now, actually, I think Denver would have like almost 8 million. I need to redo the math because Spot Track's not updated with with like math wise yet because the deals aren't all final. But I think we have something like around 8 million of space between where we are at and the first apron that we could offer somebody, but there's nobody kind of on the market that I would give that kind of money to.
Mark Stein said Nuggets continue to lobby Valančiūnas to
Yeah.
stay in the NBA rather than push for a buyout. Yeah, I mean that just makes sense with the Nuggets.
Yeah, and it maybe makes sense for Val too if this is a leverage place that like okay, I saw one option that someone put out there that's like we don't have to fully guarantee the second year because we can maintain some flexibility by saying we'll partially guarantee year 2 so that even if we wanted to waive him at the end of next year, he's guaranteed some money coming to him like let's just say there's something like cursed about being a backup big in Denver and then he had just like the worst season of all time. There's still like money guaranteed coming to him next season as well. Like the year after this one upcoming. So that's an option too.
Yeah, the backup center curse for the Nuggets is still. We thought we were clear of it, and here it is again, striking once again. Yeah, I don't know if it's hard for him to stomach being a backup, and he's like, "Hey, like I can go be a starter in EuroLeague, and maybe my NBA days are over." But I don't really know where he's at. I think we can convince him.
We should just offer him a starting job. Jokic would come off the bench for the team, right?
Jokic would love coming off the bench.
We'd fix the bench problems probably. Oh my god, Jokic for 6th man of the year.
EuroLeague. I don't know what he wants, but at least now he's getting Denver's attention to possibly voice his concerns and what he wants. And I do think Denver's a great situation. He has the chance to win a title. We haven't got
Yep,
into it, but like
I know.
we're one of the best teams in the league once again. I wanted to go to this comment before we get too deep in the show. Off topic, but have you guys seen the Hollinger article calling the Nuggets moves penny pinchers? It's funny because the same dude also said that the Monte Will trade for KCP was a money move and a salary dump. And then he later was like, that was one of my worst takes. Um,
That's funny.
so I
Yeah.
don't know. Of course, he's doing it again. It's so weird.
People get stuck in their frameworks. It's like me and point guards.
Yeah. I can't believe he's
'Cause
doing it again. Why would you not want to play in Denver? Completely agree. I think it'd be a
I don't
great
know, ask
situation for
everybody.
him.
I think what's gonna end up happening is that he will play with Denver for at least part of the season, if not the entire season, and be professional and, like, be fine. Maybe Denver does end up giving into a leverage play and at least partially guaranteeing that second year. Maybe they don't. I think this is an interesting test for Tenzer and Wallace. I also think that what I just said about him staying is the best option in front of Denver, because while they will open up, like I said, the ability to sign other guys, and they already have like room to do that, by the way. Like we were going to be talking about what additional moves we want Denver to make that still maintains flexibility, even with Val just kind of on the roster set and all that. But they'd have even more of that to an extent. But I think that the best thing
Mm.
going forward for from Denver's perspective would be to convince him to stay.
One viewer brought up how they're thinking Greece would have to be the team to buy out Jonas, but that wouldn't be it. Denver would have to be the ones to buy him
Denver
out.
would buy him out. They could work out technically, they could try to work out an arrangement where they where they bought out part of his contract and then let whatever he's getting from the other team offset the rest kind of thing. The details of a buyout aren't really important now. The question is like whether they're going to do it or not. They're important in that you want to know if they are going to buy him out, how much is going to be kind of dead cap on our cap sheet right now. And that just that depends on whatever number Denver decides to buy him out for. But that like Denver would have to be the ones to buy him out because it's our contract.
We've also seen this happen a lot where players get traded to a team and they want to buy out and they're like holding out, trying to get a buyout. It usually doesn't just happen right away. It's not like
That's true.
I've never seen it happen where the player's like, I want to be bought out and it happens like the next day. They usually drags out.
Even last year, we were talking about like when is this Russ trade going to be official, or like signing Russ on a minimum, but they had to wait for the Clippers to first agree to a trade with Utah,
Yeah.
and then Utah bought him out of, immediately after that, but you had to wait for the trade to happen first and, all of this stuff. So that's a concerning thing that you said that is also true, Will, because if there is going to be a buyout, we won't necessarily know right away. It could take some time.
I guess in this case, Denver would be incentivized to move quicker on it because they're
Yeah.
not just going to be willing to have Valančiūnas riding the bench like in protests, not showing up to practices or not showing up to games or whatever the hell, and getting fined for it. We would want to get a guy in right away instead of him. So they'll probably have to make a decision on it, but it's not like Jonas has the edge to force Denver moving quickly on it right now.
And like you're talking about like holding out and being pouty. I just don't think that's going to happen. Like he's known as like a consummate professional locker room guy, all this stuff too. So I just don't think he would do that. It would just be like he is probably going to be generally unhappy.
The tough part about this is he is getting this contract from this other team. So he's almost like, I don't really care about this current one. My money's already like quote unquote in the bag from this other team.
But
I
it's
just need to
not
get
if we
out.
don't let him go.
Yeah. It does make him a little more like
And the
other
longer the longer that goes on too, like the other team could just move on because they have their own roster to fill out.
I know, but how many times do these zero teams have a chance to get an NBA rotation player who should be playing in the NBA just
Well,
going to their
yeah,
team?
but they still have their own roster to fill out, and if they think Denver's just gonna take them into the season, they have to move on.
I
I don't
guess
know
so.
how like salary cap rules work in EuroLeague, but they can't just like leave that cap space open to sign him whenever Denver decides to let him go. Like they probably have to fill out their own roster.
Yeah. I mean, I hope we don't have to hold him against his will and have him be pouting, like you said about him, but you
I
never
don't know.
know.
I'm
Like,
not gonna lie, I'd do a lot of things for $10 million.
come on, just play one season with Jokic and the Nuggets. You'll love it. Win a ring and retire. Go to EuroLeague. That's fine. Just give us one
Yeah.
season.
If he really doesn't want to be here that badly, then like I said, trade deadline's a thing. But I don't think that Denver's going to try to. I don't think that Denver's going to try to buy him out before that, unless he's like he really doesn't want to be here that badly. Then he'll end up renouncing the entire contract and like foregoing the rest of that money.
Hmm.
So
Which makes me feel good about Denver, at least with like the worst case scenario of just not having him to play, which is what I want. At least it's not going to like punish us or kill us in any way.
if you have made it to this point, we really appreciate you guys. And if you like our content, please remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button. So glad to finally get over 1,000 subs. hit the notification bell, and always remember, people, winning is fun and losing sucks, which is what we should tell Jonas so that he stays.
Come on, come win in Denver. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for getting us to 1,000 subs. Love you all. Talk to you soon.